Hey, pushers. We're going to conclude the early Republic video series with dealing with the identity and society of the United States during this last period of the 1700s. Last video, we talked about the election of 1800, or also known as the Revolution of 1800, where Thomas Jefferson and the Republican Party win control of the White House and Congress. The Federalist Party, in their defeat, peacefully transfer power over to the Republicans. And a lot will argue that that is the success of the American Revolution. Let's talk about that statement, because some people might think that the revolution is about the war. Well, others will argue that the revolution was about the ideals of how this United States became. The issues and situations and conflicts prior to the outbreak of the Revolutionary War, the war itself, and the impact and the consequences of the United States becoming an independent nation. Say, for example, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitutional Convention, and these early administrations under Washington and Adams. Concluding with this election of 1800, that all of that can be the revolution. And we go back to that famous question of, or infamous question, was the revolution revolutionary? Well, that's for you to decide. And of course, historians argue about the election of 1800, this revolution of 1800, and that this peaceful transfer of power was revolutionary and it was the success of the revolution. But let's talk about what it means to be an American. So let's define identity.
Some political watchers.
Okay, so what do we mean by an American identity? Basically, we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to be a citizen of the United States of America, a resident of the United States of America? When we talk about the United States, when we talk about America, right? Are we talking about America, right? Well, what's associated with that? What elements and characteristics define Americanism? How have we gotten to this identity? What is the consensus on this identity? And sure, there's probably going to be disagreement on some elements, and there'll all be even debates, among contemporaries throughout the period, and even as we go on in life. But let's break down the common elements of an American identity, especially around this time period, this early Republic time period. So let's talk about American Republicanism. Let's emphasize some major elements. One would be, of course, individualism, right? That the individual American, the individual citizen is important, is a priority, and that their natural rights, the rights that they have been given since they were born, should be guaranteed, should be encouraged to express, and have the responsibility to deal with the consequences of their actions. So when we look at individual rights and liberty, yes, we see that concentrated in the Bill of Rights and in the Declaration of Rights sections of state constitutions, and what those, those other principles that are in other foundational documents, like the Declaration of Independence, like the Constitution of the United States. But we want to talk about having a virtuous and autonomous citizen, that individual, but that individual lives and breathes in this American Republic, and that when they make their choices, right, whenever they express their ideas, whenever they voice their criticisms toward their government, whatever their economic pursuits are, they also have to make decisions about what is best for not only them, but what is best for their community and what is best for their state and what is best for their country, right? That this is about the general welfare. This is about the common good. We are in a republic, and that the citizen is responsible for their other neighbors, and of course their responsibilities toward their government, toward their nation. So where is that line drawn, right? We get into issues about national security versus individual liberties. Where is the priority? Where do we decide one is more important than the other, maybe even based on the circumstance of the situation? Another element when it comes to American Republicanism is the power of the people, right? The Constitution itself begins with "we the people." there's an emphasis on the power of the people, this popular sovereignty. Now, we do establish a representative democracy. There is a republic, right? The citizens elect representatives to the House of Representatives. They elect state legislatures that originally selected the senators, right? They indirectly choose the president through the Electoral College. And that's essential, right? That the government is responsible to the people, that the people, there is a will of the people, and that those ideas and those perspectives and those points of view should be reflected and considered as part of public policy. But there was also a concern with that it shouldn't be direct democracy. We do have direct democracy elements at the local level, in some cases at the state level, but at the federal level, not so much, right? Only the House of Representatives is directly elected by the people. But even then, that is a representative democracy element. People really have no direct power and say when it comes to the federal government overall. And that was on purpose, right? The framers were like, we want to avoid mob rule. That was a very, very terrible concern of theirs. They frowned upon direct democracy. They criticized those that wanted the people to have ultimate say, or even much of a direct say on every element of government and public policy. This idea that this would threaten the interests of the minority, right? We get Federalist 10 with the tyranny of the majority and factions, and this is why this large republic has to exist under this Constitution. We don't want anarchy, and that is terrible. You know, the people can be fickle, the people can be misled, as some may argue, right? Even back then, they had arguments in the Constitutional Convention on what degree do we give the people to vote? Where's their power? You know, where's that line drawn? However, those that argued in favor of the people did have also genuine concerns, right? That we want to avoid tyranny. We want to wipe away the ancient regime traditions of monarchy and aristocracy and titles of nobility, and that this inherent wealth and this bloodlines determined your worth. And no, we want to set up a nation of laws. We do not want a nation of making decisions based on arbitrary and trying to concentrate further power and all for these ambitions, right? If all men were angels, like Federalist 51 argues. And this is why they set up the Constitution to have, yes, powers, strengthen the federal government, right? Because we want law and order, we want that organization, but we also want limits. And that's why we establish separation of powers, checks and balances between the branches of government. There is a fine line between the power of the states and the federal government, but again, the federal government is supreme. And we don't want those that are elite to become drunk with power and consider that they deserve to be in power because of their birth, because of their wealth, because of the power that they may accumulate. We don't want that. And there need to be contingencies, right? There need to be those auxiliary precautions to prevent that consolidation of power. And that is another major element of American republicanism. We also want to promote good citizens. We want, and when we mean by good citizens, we're talking about, yes, moral, ethical citizens. They emphasize religious freedom. They emphasize the freedom of conscience. They emphasized and wanted to guarantee that people needed to pursue their own the morals and ethics and guidance through whatever faith, whatever belief system, whatever justifications they had, that was protected. But as long as it didn't interfere with other groups, right, and the rights of others. And also education. Education had been part of the quote unquote American identity since the colonies, right? Since the early colonies, especially in New England, there was public education laws because they wanted those to be literate, to understand the Bible so that they could understand what it means to be good, to be moral. But now there's an evolution here, right? Now we want educated citizens to not only be good and virtuous, but we want them to understand what it means to be an American, right? That what does it mean to adhere to these Republican principles? What are these principles, and how can we promote them, foster them, and facilitate them, and engage in those ideals, right? To fulfill the revolution, right? To fulfill what the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution have established, right? Those ideals. And now we got to look at, like you see here, avoidance and prevention of corruption, right? We want to be good and virtuous citizens because we don't want anyone to consolidate power and become drunk with power, right? We don't want that opportunity for avarice, right? Greed. And so there are going to be elements that some will come up to the idea that the government has become too powerful, that it caters to particular groups and interests. And that's why others will say that we have to go for the ideal citizen, right? The yeoman farmer, the plain folk. It connects back to power of the people, right? They're the majority. This is what it means to be an American, because you want to be independent, right? A yeoman farmer, especially. The Republicans will really push this. I mean, I talk about the Democratic Republicans. And they're going to push the yeoman farmer as that ideal citizen. Why? Because this person owns their own land, they work their own land, and they are beholden to no one. And that is the kind of voter we want. We want a voter that will make a decision on choosing an elected representative that will make good law because they are doing it on their own volition. They're not being influenced or pressured by any other special interest, right? No owner, right? No business owner. No one like that, right? That they're truly making an independent decision. And I guess one of the last elements of this American republicanism, this American identity, is equality, equal opportunity, that each individual will be treated equally before the law, and that no privilege, no specific particular category will be considered over others, right? We won't look at this is because of your wealth and because of your social status and your class or anything like that, that will give you, the government will give you preference. No, each individual that, eligible to vote, eligible to be a citizen, that is a citizen, will be treated equally before the law. This is a nation of laws. We have law and order, and the government is limited in that aspect. But then we ask the question, right? Are these values, are they universal? And that's where we can get really complex, right? That what does it mean to be an American, right? We've established these identity principles, these identity values. But at this time, right, in the early republic, 1780s, 1790s, heading into the 19th century, is there a little bit more to this American identity? Like, what does it really mean to be an American at this time? And are these principles, are these ideals being universally applied? Well, that's something we have to consider. Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper in a general sense with the American society. So what does it mean to be an American? Well, recall, right? We don't want to give anybody any special privilege, right? No titles of nobility. They're serious about that. The Constitution puts it plain, right? Article 1, Section 9, that no titles of nobility will be granted by the federal government, that it's not allowed by the states to do it, by the local governments. No, if anybody wants to really adhere to those titles of nobility, they're going to have to sacrifice voting. They're going to have to sacrifice being a part of this American republicanism, this American society. And we're starting to veer away from the cultural norms, the social norms of deference and patronage. Whereas a working class individual, a poor person, right, can't vote because a lot of these states are still requiring property to vote. But some states, not really. And the culture was that these particular individuals, the social group, right, the working class, common folk, majority, right, not very wealthy, many poor, they would have to tip their hat to those with wealth, with prestige, with status. They have to move out of the way. And what we're seeing is that among Americans, they're starting to frown upon that custom. They're frowning upon that social norm, getting away from that and seeing themselves on an equal playing field. And that opportunity for wealth, opportunity for economic prosperity, for that pursuit of happiness is available to everyone, at least, to a degree. And so by eliminating those titles of nobility, we're getting away from the ancient regimes, we're getting away from those, very rigid social stratified elements that we see in France, that we see in England. And now we're going more toward, again, equal opportunity, that individual liberty, and that we're all equal before the law. But what economic prosperity, what economic opportunities are there? Well, the United States is, at this point in time, very much agrarian. It's 90% of Americans are in the agrarian society. It is a predominantly agricultural economy, an agricultural society. Remaining is commerce, right? Trade, shipping, and manufacturing. Our manufacturing is minimal, and it's even localized, right? More in New England, more in the north. You see it in the urban areas, port cities. Outside of New England, New York, Philadelphia. That's about it. That's about it. But there is a development happening. There is where, prior to this time, individual families, whether on the farm or in the cities, they tended to produce more for their own subsistence, right? Their own survival. Now, with this developing economy and this fostering of diversifying this economy in the sectors of manufacturing and commerce, promoting more of that, now there's more opportunity in the sense of, let's start producing more for the markets. We'll also start seeing more opportunities for entrepreneurs, they invest or speculate in land, right? The federal government selling land. As we foster these new sectors of the economy, there's opportunity there, right? To get into the manufacturing sector, to get a manufacturing job, to get into commerce and trade. There's that opportunity there. And then one other element of this American society that gets, this is a major change, and it's going to take some time, but it is a big change. And we see that when it comes to religion, right? During the colonies, for one to vote, yes, male, white, landowner, but also member of the church, member of the state church. And with the Constitution, yes, you're going to have the First Amendment with the Establishment Clause and Free Exercise Clause. But there's also Article 6, Clause 3, where the Constitution forbids anyone taking on a public trust, right? Meaning an office, right? Any federal office or any public office anywhere at local, state, and federal level. They should not be required to take any vow to a particular religion, right? No religious test is what they mean, so that they do not have to subscribe to Protestantism or some particular denomination of Protestantism or Catholicism, anything like that. No. And this is where you get the idea of that separation of church and state. This is one element of that. And what is also happening is that more states, right? The federal government under the Constitution says no religious test, but the states still have some requirements of, like, there is an official state religion or there is a religious requirement. But after Article 6, Clause 3 of the Constitution gets rid of that religious test, now more and more states start getting away from having a state religion, their own state religion. And this is what we call disestablishment. Disestablishment is when more and more of the states start veering away from officially recognizing a state religion. So this is again part of that identity that is happening. It's changing, right? You're noticing that this American identity can change. It doesn't have to be necessarily consistent. And more elements of separation of church and state, which we've seen. It's not like this is new, right? Roger Williams, right? The Quakers weren't really, they religious freedom. You go to Virginia with Madison and Jefferson and the religious freedom, and they criticized, the state subsidies of religious education and religion. This isn't anything new. it's, again, an evolving identity, and this identity of separation of church and state is becoming, increasingly elemental here, right? Fundamental. Okay, so there's that. There's that. Now let's talk about the more social groups, right? Part of this American society. And again, going back to that question, like when it comes to these principles and values of the American identity in this early Republic period, is it universal? So now we look to women. So let's watch a couple of videos from NBC Learn. All right, let's start with educating women.
Women had served significant roles in the American Revolution, from filling in for their absent soldier husbands in the farm to helping the army as nurses and cooks. When it was over, they clamored for their rights, no longer content to be subservient housewives.
And so after the American Revolution, there is this revolution in women's education. The women say, wait a minute, if we're going to raise our sons and teach them the glories of John Locke and tell them about the Roman Republic and how America is a republic, we have to be educated. We can't not know history. We can't not know political science. We can't not know philosophy. We have to know these things so we can pass them down.
Schools designed specifically to educate women popped up across the states.
There rise up in the states young ladies' academies where for the first time girls from the middle and upper classes get formal education. And these young ladies' academies are one of the greatest changes in young women's lives. And if you trace from young ladies' academies to Mount Holyoke College to the entrance of women at Oberlin, it's not that it's a straight line, but you can see women begin to say, what about our rights?
Wow. Now you're seeing that education for women, the opportunities are starting to increase. This is especially true in the New England region and in the middle states, right? New York, Philadelphia. These schools that they mentioned in this video do start popping up, and there's a reason for this. There's a major reason for this. Not only the idea of, hey, I read the Declaration of Independence, I've been hearing all of these ideals and values, right? And I participated in the war and, defending those ideals and values. I want to be a part of that, right? We deserve this. But there is another element, and let's understand what this is: Republican motherhood. And what is this, right? This becomes part of this identity in the new republic. So let's check out this video from NBC Learn on Republican motherhood.
At the end of the war, what is obvious is that the old colonial idea that women's brains are weak and they're incapable of making political choices or moral choices, rational decisions, is obviously not true. Women have taken sides in the American Revolution, they've made sacrifices, they've risked their life, and it's obvious that they have acted on political loyalties. So when the war is over, the question becomes, so where do they fit into the republic? Where do they fit into this representative government? So it's not as if after the revolution, the leaders of the country are going to say, ladies, you were so good, we're going to make you citizens, and would you like to run for office? They do begin to think that women can play what they call a civic role in the new republic. How are we going to sustain this new republic? Through patriotism. The next generation of men have to prove to be good patriots. And here is what women can do. Women can raise patriotic sons. In a sense, they politicize mothering. Being a good mother becomes a political act. Now, Republican motherhood, which is what they call it, not as in the Republican Party, but the Republic, suggests that every time a mother tells her son, You must be willing to sacrifice for your country. You must believe in your authority in society, that they are doing something that is political. It doesn't mean they have economic independence. It doesn't mean they have political rights themselves. It doesn't mean that they leave the household. But it means that what they do in the household has a civic component. We now agree that they have brains, that they can make political choices, that they can be patriotic. And this elevates, in some sense, the status of women from simply household manufacturers and producers of children to citizens in the new country. They're not full citizens, but they are doing civic duty.
And that is an interesting dynamic now. Some could say, oh, that's new. Is it though? Or is it more of an evolution? Are women in American society, and going back to the colonies, right? Were they important? Were they the head of the household in the sense of the private sphere? And to a degree, yes, right? Women were responsible, or mothers were responsible for providing basic education, right? Basic education to both son and daughter, raising the daughter to be like a mother, right? The head of that private sphere, but the son to be educated through basic knowledge, but also to be a good person. Mother was that moral foundation, that moral center of the family. Is this still happening? Absolutely. And it's now the mother is assuming more responsibility here, and that is this Republican mother. As in, we are going to teach, as Republican mothers, we are going to teach the next generation, these children, our children, to be good, virtuous, moral citizens in this republic. And it goes back to, well, let's give them the education to teach them these principles so that they understand these values of this new republic. And so, yes, it gives them more status, more responsibility, a higher sense of importance. But again, the irony is cannot vote, limited property rights, limited, virtually absent in the public sphere. Their public political voice is barely existent, if at all, in most of the country. But this idea of a Republican motherhood, that the mother is now responsible in assuming a role of teaching and raising good citizens of the republic. All right. So
at the end of
let's move on. Sorry. Here we go. Now let's go to another social group. Let's talk about Black Americans of this early republic. And do the ideals, right, of this American identity extend to Black Americans? And I'm sure a lot of us are already saying absolutely not, right? Because why? Because enslavement is on the books. Enslavement is apparent, evident, absolutely totally exists, especially in the Southern colonies. And so what about the Constitution, right? We could talk about the Declaration of Independence, but we've discussed the ironies of that, right? All men are created equal, not so much. Thomas Jefferson, primary author, major enslaver, right? Major slave owner. But let's see what the Constitution has. To recap that, right? There is the 3/5 compromise. So the enslaved are counted in the census, but as 3/5 of a person. Despite even 3/5, they don't even get any vote. They don't get 3/5 of a vote. They don't get any vote. It's just, just 3/5. They are counted as 3/5 of a person. This was, again, to provide further representation for those major slave owning states. You also have the Fugitive Slave Clause, which will be enforced through the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. The federal government is obligated to return that lost or escaped property, right? So some will argue that that is fulfilling the right to property for those that own slaves. And then there are those that consider this kidnapping. Of course, we'll find this among abolitionist societies. Speaking of abolitionist societies, in 1775, Pennsylvania Abolition Society will become the first American abolition society in its history. Of course, there are probably some precursors and sort of thing, but this is officially under this new republic here, and more will grow from that. We'll see in other parts of the nation, especially particularly in the North, and especially in urban areas like in New York City and definitely in New England. And so there's a growing trend to fulfill those ideals of the republic, right? Of equality, of liberty, especially. And speaking of liberty, let's see if there are opportunities to apply these principles, even in a legal sense. So let's hear the story of Elizabeth Freeman.
When we think of slavery, we think of cotton fields in the antebellum South. But at the time of the Declaration of Independence, slavery was legal in each of the 13 colonies. A lawsuit brought by a black woman known as Mum Bet would lead to its abolition in Massachusetts. Mum Bet was born a slave and spent her adult life working in the house of John Ashley, a judge in the Massachusetts courts. Going about her work in the Ashley home, Bet overheard discussions about the 1780 Massachusetts Constitution. Later, she said, when she heard the words, "all men are born free and equal," it occurred to her that those rights should apply to everyone.
So you have an enslaved black woman who understands herself within this evolving narrative of democracy that is happening in the earliest moments after the Revolutionary War.
In 1781, Bet approached prominent lawyer Theodore Sedgwick for his advice. Sedgwick felt the case would be stronger if a man's name were attached, so he added another one of Ashley's slaves to the file, a man named Brom. Together they decided to do something revolutionary. They sued for freedom. Sedgwick presented in court, and the very next day, the jury voted in favor of Bet and Brom. They had won, making them the first people in Massachusetts to sue for and win their freedom. As soon as she was free, Mum Bet discarded her slave name. She renamed herself Elizabeth Freeman.
She sets a precedent for other enslaved folks in Massachusetts to be able to come before the courts and make the case. And with her case and others that come immediately after, Massachusetts is one of the earliest states in the Union to abolish slavery.
Across the North, enslaved persons began to argue that the new republic's freedoms should apply to them too. In 1804, New Jersey became the last northern state to pass a law ending slavery. But because a number of these measures only provided for gradual emancipation, there were still enslaved people living in the North deep into the antebellum era. In December 1865, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified, and it was this that finally abolished the institution of slavery across the country.
There it is, right? The idea that, hey, these principles, these values of equality and liberty should apply to me, right? And yeah, and as we see, this state of Massachusetts.
When we think of slavery,
is going to be the next state. So to kind of give you an idea, let's look at this map here. And yes, those in the light green by state constitution, we have Massachusetts in 1780, and New Hampshire in 1783. Vermont, when it becomes a state, its original constitution will abolish slavery, will not allow it when it becomes a member of the Union. Rhode Island, Connecticut by 1784, it's gradual emancipation. So, up to a certain age, those that reach a certain age will become free. They won't be in further enslaved, but those that are pretty much grandfathered in, that's a different story. But over time, what's going to happen is that the numbers will reduce. And don't forget that in the Northwest Territory, slavery is prohibited by that. So this is progress, and it extends. It extends to these ideals to other parts of the world. We've heard about the French Revolution, but the Haitian Revolution, Toussaint Louverture, he inspired by the American Revolution and these ideals embodied in the Declaration of Independence. He launches slave revolt, but it turns into this Haitian Revolution to become free and independent. to abolish slavery, but also to to get away from the clutches of the French Empire. And this is going to cause some concern for Americans, white Americans, especially in the South. But the Haitian Revolution, along with these ideals, is going to inspire others when they get wind of this, when they hear about what's happening in places like Haiti. We get Gabriel's rebellion in Virginia, and Gabriel, of course, he hears about what's happening. He decides that this life is not life. It's liberty is deserved, equality needs should be applied, and they launch this rebellion, and unfortunately is quashed, and the reaction to it is going to be severe, and slave codes are going to be reinforced. These slave laws are going to be applied to make sure that the literacy is limited, education is limited, congregation is limited, and that way that they don't get the idea that they can organize themselves and launch some social rebellion, this slave revolt, and undermine the institutions that these white Southerners want to preserve. But what about free Black Americans? What about those that are free, that become freed? What are they doing as a matter of reflecting these principles and values of the American identity? Well, we are going to get the Free African Society. Free African Society is a benevolent association. It is out of Philadelphia that is designed to provide support, financial, economic, educational support for freed Black Americans. They may have been recently freed from enslavement. Their education is limited, their opportunities are limited, and the Free African Society is going to provide that foundation, that the opportunities, right, to get a basic education, to learn how to engage in this economy, in this American economy, to pursue endeavors in this society, in this economy, understand what it means to be a member of the society, a free member of this society. And so it also is going to be reflected among other prominent leaders. Absalom Jones, he was formerly enslaved, and he's going to become a pastor, and he's going to found a Methodist church. And then he, along with Richard Allen, Bishop Richard Allen, who founds the Episcopalian Church, they organize themselves, they come together, and in response to the segregation of churches in Philadelphia, by the way, they were relegated, Black Americans, even free, tended to be relegated to the upper level of churches, that they asked to be part of the ceremonies of all the rituals regarding the Episcopalian Church. White Americans refused. They segregated even in the church. And so Absalom Jones and Richard Allen are going to found the African Methodist Episcopal Church, or the AME. And even despite those different denominations, it was designed to establish the first independent Black American church, right? Where Black Americans could come together and engage in their Christian faith without having to suffer through the disrespect of segregation, racism. And this is going to develop a community and a sense of identity among Black Americans through this African Methodist Episcopal Church. This is going to be modeled in other forms throughout the country. Okay. So in our class, we compare Thomas Jefferson's his words in the Declaration of Independence, and we also have Benjamin Banneker. Benjamin Banneker, he was hired as a surveyor around Washington, D.C., and he pretty much makes a name for himself as extremely qualified. And for some white Americans, this is surprising, quote unquote, because how did they that potential? But Benjamin Banneker does earn his keep, and he reads the Declaration of Independence. He's mindful of enslavement. He's mindful of the racist treatment and the segregation. And so he writes a letter to Thomas Jefferson in 1791. And if you read the excerpt here, he's basically calling him out. That although you were so fully convinced of the benevolence of the Father of mankind and of his equal and impartial distribution of these rights and privileges, what about those in captivity? What about those in enslavement? So he is addressing him as an equal. He's addressing him in a similar rhetoric, but he's also calling him out in a respectful manner. He's not being condescending. Banneker doesn't have this aggressive tone in his letter, but he's direct. He's pretty much, hey, you're the author of the Declaration of Independence. It's, you see the excerpt over here, right? That all men are created equal, and the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, property. Where's the consistency? Those are treasured American ideals, but they're not universally applied. What's up with that? And Jefferson does reply to him. Interestingly, sir, right? As almost like an equal. He responds to him and says, like, I get you, I see, you're not wrong, and I'm willing to look into that. That's basically how, you read the excerpt here, just pause the video, just have a chance to analyze Jefferson's letter here. You'll note that he gets the premise here. I see your main idea, I see your thesis, and I'll give it some thought. I'll look into it. Because Jefferson has some written positions about non-whites. He has, in his notes on Virginia, he has conveyed that Black Americans are incapable, just do not have the mental capacities to be equal to white Americans. He has similar sentiments on indigenous peoples, that they will never truly be civilized, no matter how hard they could try, no matter how hard the federal government could promote the fostering and quote unquote civilization of natives. Just won't really ever happen to that full degree. So the idea that he's willing to share Benjamin Banneker's his own ideas and thoughts, it's progress, but still doesn't not accepting of it, and probably never will. But that's this is where the American identity is right now. If we look at the quantitative analysis here, we look at population of slaves. So here's an opportunity to practice analyzing quantitative data through patterns and trends. That's really what you want to try to do. Whenever you get a chart, graph, anything like this, anything quantitative, look for patterns, look for trends, avoid absolutes, right? Look for those patterns and trends. So we have population of slaves, always that title, right? This is from the census 1790 and census 1800. So this is the Constitution required to do this. And we have 1790, 1800, so every 10 years. And we have these states, or technically part of Massachusetts at this time. You have New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut. Okay, so these New England states, right? New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, the middle states, and then with the southern states of Maryland, Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, the great state of South Carolina, and Georgia, and of course the total population. So we can break down, right, by region, and then we just look over the numbers. Okay, looking at 1790 numbers, the total population, just to kind of look at it that way, has pretty much more than doubled. Okay, so we can infer from that. Of course, we want to concentrate on the focus here, right? The focus topic is population of the enslaved, but we can also infer that, hey, business is good in America, right? People are flocking to the United States. Birth rates are relatively high, and that could mean that we have a good standard of living here in the United States, so we can infer from that. But in returning to the focus on population of slaves, do we see any patterns or trends? And we noticed that among the New England states, the population of the enslaved is extremely low. And from 1790 to 1800, virtually gone. There is gradual. We see, Rhode Island, Connecticut, but when we compare, do a comparative analysis with the map right next door here, we see that that's gradual emancipation, and it is gradually emancipated. Right? New York, very similar. Notice that New York, very, very, pretty solid number, especially when you compare it to some of these southern states. Very high population in New York, but also New York was dependent on that, on enslavement there, to a degree in regards to, more apprentice and merchant levels. But Pennsylvania, all right, that's a considerable drop. That's the thing about New York, right? It's not much of a gradual emancipation. They kind of take their time. You see 1799, that's when it really starts to get going. So it takes a while. Pennsylvania, okay. All right, New Jersey, a little bit of increase, but again, they are late to the party relative to the other northern states. But then you look at the South and yeah, there's a considerable high degree here. And you can see, but when you pause the video, you can look at these numbers and you can kind of get an idea of like what more we could infer from analyzing these trends and patterns in these types of charts. So take a chance to get an idea of how we can infer from these types of sources. Okay, when it comes to Native Americans, the indigenous people are under constant threat of encroachment by white American settlers. And in the Ohio River Valley, there's going to be a Western Confederacy that is going to organize itself, Western Confederacy of the tribes there, and they are going to stand up for their land claims. They keep seeing more and more white American settlers just planting their flags and just saying, mine, 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 mine. No, they've had enough. And they do a pretty decent job in taking on the American military. President Washington will send in troops, but he's getting reports that it's tough out there. Eventually, the major turning point is going to be the Battle of Fallen Timbers. It will result in American victory, but Washington is going to take the position that, I need to keep the peace out there. We have to come to some arrangement where it's not about treating them equally, but the idea that let's see if we can get them with quote unquote the program. So they negotiate the Treaty of Grenville, and it's here where it outlines a recognition of land claims. It's not all that great for natives. So here's one aspect. The Treaty of Grenville will say, all right, natives, we recognize your land claims to the west, but they had to give up the eastern portion of the Northwest Territories. So what becomes the state of Ohio and around the eastern Great Lakes, they gave that up. The natives had to give up those claims to a degree. But the United States will recognize the claims in the western portion of the Northwest Territory. So as you get closer to say like Illinois and Wisconsin out there, that is extremely upsetting for some of the natives, especially the leaders. They are going to feel as if this wasn't really all that fantastic of a deal, but they also don't trust that the federal government is going to enforce the prohibition of white American settlement into those prohibited lands, and they're right. They're absolutely correct. This is not going to stop Americans. Let's always remember that that is a common theme in this topic. White American settlers will not stop encroaching west. They will not stop going west. It is part of their destiny. All right, spoiler alert. Meanwhile, the Washington and even in the Adams administration are going to engage in these what's called these intercourse acts, sometimes non-intercourse acts, but the Indian Trade and Intercourse Acts. It's a series of acts that are addressing the idea of like, well, how do we deal with trade and relations with the Native Americans? Again, reinforcing these land seizures, these encroachments. But recognizing their sovereignties to a degree, but also trying to foster these quote unquote civilization programs. And here in this painting, we have Benjamin Hawkins. Benjamin Hawkins is going to be a federal agent appointed by Washington. And he is going to be responsible for trying to quote unquote civilize the natives. He's going to move to Georgia and he will learn the language among the Creek tribes. But by doing that, he's not necessarily assimilating them and trying to become equal to them. He's doing it so that he can teach them the American economy, the American society, these principles of what it means to Christianize them, but also private property rights, economic pursuits, dealing with the market, getting into manufacturing and, European and American-based agrarian practices, personal wealth, personal ambition, personal trade and commerce. That is the intent here. That's, to kind of subtly and gradually try to civilize the natives. And some will adapt and some will be hesitant and others will understand what the real intent is, the ulterior motive here. And it's a dicey, tense relationship. They're trying to say, but again, the mentality is that the natives, they have to either get with a program or they are going to continue losing their rights and privileges and their claims to their own land. And they're not going to get much support among those in charge, among those in the government. Okay, this is a fantastic question. I love this question. I want you to consider, you can pause the video here and really get an appreciation for this question. So, and it's really consistent with what we were getting at here. So the United States historians have proposed various events to mark the beginning of American identity. So we defined an American identity, at least what we think, a consensus of what it is. And now what we're asking ourselves is, which one of the events listed below begins that American identity, and explain, of course, why that's true, or at least why you agree it's that. So we have the end of the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War in 1763. That's something to consider. Like, what could boost that? Is that when the American identity begins? Is it when the Second Continental Congress and the delegates there sign the Declaration of Independence? Is it when the United States declares war, is when the American identity begins? Or is it the Constitution? When the Constitution is ratified in 1788, is that the beginning of the American identity? So you go back to those principles and values that we talked about, what it means to be an American in this early Republic period. Think about that. And what's great is B. Contrast your choice against one of the other options, demonstrating why that option is not as good as your choice. That's a great way to get into complexity. So identify which one you think, provide evidence and logical reasoning, and then think about why the other ones wouldn't be. And that can give you a better sense of being able to argue and not only, have a thesis and develop it with and substantiate it with evidence and reasoning, but also qualifying or modifying your argument and understanding why those could choose the other options, right? So think about that, pause on that, and this can help you with those essays, right? On the DBQ and the LEQ with complexity. All right, this way you can look over to help you out here, look at some continuity and change over time. But that'll do it, everybody. I hope this all helped. All right, so I'll see you next time.